and welcome to our how many Sunday brunches is this now, Alex? Number.
This is season 10, episode 24.
Okay.
Yes,
And great, and we
Luck.
welcome back, everyone. I hope you're having a great Sunday. So we're joined by Vanman Talks and Mike Galsworthy for our Sunday brunch today. I'd like to start off with getting both of those guys are very famous, both of them, but get both of them to tell us a little bit about themselves. Mike, do you want to go first? Just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've been doing recently, and maybe some plans for the future when it comes to Brexit.
Okay, just briefly, I set up Scientists for EU in 2015, and then the Healthy In campaign, which became NHS Against Brexit and then People's NHS. I worked alongside the Stronger In, because I didn't like them, the Stronger In campaign during the referendum. Then afterwards, alongside all the other campaigns that became People's Vote. In fact, my campaigns were part of the founding members of that. Ran a social media intelligence unit to support that, helped set up the March for Change campaign, and then from that spun out the Bylines Network, which is 8 regional publications that sits alongside. Oh, this is one of them, that sits alongside Byline Times and Byline TV. So at the moment, I'm currently running Scientists for EU and the People's NHS, which goes with it, director of the Bylines Network, and also I'm a strategic campaigns advisor for European Movement, which I just started at the beginning of this year. So I keep myself busy that way.
You're a busy man, all right. Before we go on to Van Man Talks, can you tell us a bit about what's happening with Brexit and the European Union when it comes on the scientific front? Because that's, I think, one of the things you're more famous for.
Okay, now that's a huge topic. So trying to do that in 30 seconds, let's say that the last science program, Horizon 2020, we were on it all the way through from 2014 to 2020. We used to be in pole position with Germany in terms of grants we'd get in terms of amount of money. But during the years since the Brexit vote, we fell to 5th place behind Germany, France, Spain, Italy, then us in 5th place just above the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is a small country. So this is an absolute money take. And lost out on 1.5 billion there, a reduction of 30% on what we should have been getting. And that's just because of the uncertainty of Brexit. Now that program ended in 2020 and there's a new one, Horizon Europe, that is starting, which we signed up to be on. But we haven't actually started on it yet, even though it's been running for coming up to 1.5 years as we get into the summer, because of the threats to the withdrawal agreement, namely the Northern Ireland Protocol. So we are on ice, we are on the side until that gets resolved, and we are missing out on a lot of grants because of that. And that's the main science program, but of course, in addition to that, you get damage done to our universities by pulling out of Erasmus and loss of free movement. That also hurts our businesses. We've seen some businesses set up in the EU rather than the UK because of Brexit. There's been a chilling effect on hiring people in. We've lost the European Medicines Agency to Amsterdam, and there's a raft of other pieces of damage which is impacting on UK science at the moment.
Thanks a lot, Mike. We can get a little bit more into that later on. Van Man Talks, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you inviting me onto your live stream. I love all your guys' work. Max, Brexit Information King on YouTube. Political X, your videos on the Russian involvement with the Brexit vote are absolutely fantastic. I think that's like essential viewing for everyone in this country should watch that video. And Mike, so some of your interviews that you've done over the past are absolutely fantastic. One that sticks in front of my mind is your one with Nick Ferrari on LBC. I actually watched it recently, where you
you poured your heart out and gave an absolutely excellent assessment of the damage of Brexit. And I don't know if you remember, but Nick Ferrari came back with, but what about Eastern Europeans defecating on people's lawns?
Oh, now I remember the one that you're talking about.
You sensibly completely ignored it. But Nick, this guy...
Because that was towards the end of it, so it was running out of time. And so I was very tempted to say, what about Englishmen in a top hat and a monocle defecating on yours?
Exactly. I assure
Would that not be equally offensive? Yeah.
There is 100 British people defecating on people's lawns right now, I'm sure. Nothing to do with the Eastern European element. But anyway, I wasn't intending to start talking about defecating at the start of the show. But yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, basically anyone that doesn't know my YouTube channel, I started it a couple of years ago. I was just saying to you, Max, basically I just got sick and tired of the constant bigoted right-wing media that was absorbing so many of my friends and family. I don't know whether you remember back on the Facebook pages of Britain First and, you know, before the referendum. And I just got sick and tired of it. And in a way, I kind of just wanted to show that, you know, you can be from a working class background and do a quintessential working class job like I do, drive a van, and just not be a bigoted arsehole. And just not believe everything that Nigel Farage tells you to do, and think for yourself. And yeah, I basically just got sick of it. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to start talking into my camera, into my van. If people listen, they listen, great. And people have been. So yeah.
And I think, but I think that's something.
I think that's a really interesting point about the working class and the working class vote and patronising it. And I see the same thing up north with northern friends that were also really pissed off about being pushed into the kind of like Northerners voted for Brexit, didn't you know, camp.
Yeah.
Whereas actually it was the majority of the Brexit vote was the older generations that are well off down in the golf clubs of southern England.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there's a lot of stories told about the cultural divides around Brexit, which are very, very unproductive and don't really represent the mix of all the different viewpoints we've got in this country.
And I think that's something wonderful about your channel, Van Man Talks, is that you represent the working class Remainer vote, and that's something that's you constantly hear from the Nick Ferraris and the Farages about how no it was the middle class or the upper class middle class upper class liberal elite in London who are the Remainers. When Farage is the one who's been chauffeur driven around in a in a Range Rover to pester refugees in hotels.
They still try, these people. They still try and say I'm not working class because I live in Brighton. So they'll still try and ring you down. Yeah, it's funny.
So I just maybe we can start off. We can talk a little bit about what's happening with Brexit. I don't know if you guys have seen Kieran the van driver or Kieran the Euro courier, who posted a video of yesterday, I think it was, in just outside Dover, where there's something like a 25-mile, it's something like that, 25-mile queue of trucks going in. Now, in the media, you hear very little about it, but what you do hear is that this is about P&O ferries. This is about the Easter getaway, but it seems to be a bit more than that. It seems to be also an IT system that's down at the moment. Does anyone know anything about that?
Well, I know some because Byline TV went down to Dover to ask about this, and they were told by ops guys there several interesting things. One is that it blatantly wasn't the ferry excuses that the government was coming out with and even pushing on the heads of those companies to say were factors. It was Brexit, it was the extra paperwork, and in addition to that, because of the embarrassment around the big queues that it was causing, the cameras that monitor the roads around Dover, when the queues build up too much, they will turn them off or point them up at the sky. just so that there isn't that footage evidence. And apparently that happened from the beginning of when Brexit really kicked in. So it's a new thing. So essentially, it looks as though there's a lot of information management going on around Dover, and it's not honest and it's not transparent. The people working with the system there will tell you it's Brexit slowing everything down and snarling everything up. The local MPs and the government are doing their level best to say otherwise, and clearly putting pressure on those who operate the cameras and the road system and some of the ferries themselves in order to try and back up that story.
It's so ideologically driven that it's just going to come a cropper. It's total denial of anything. I'm trying to think of the psychological. It's Stockholm syndrome, almost. Like they're so wanted to believe in Brexit that nothing else can be true, and eventually, like that's going to come a cropper because you've got to be pragmatic when running government. And they've got the biometric checks coming in July as well, haven't they? That's going to be fun because that's the busiest point of the year. And then on top of that, you've got and that's for a variety of reasons. But on top of that, from my understanding, the cab drivers have got to come out of their lorries and go through an actual procedure before they can move on. And it's because with the country status. And I mean, what was it? It was Reece Mogg on Monday. I think, Max, you did a video on that as well, didn't you? On Mogg's little chit chat about blaming the EU. And yet it's our choice that we left. So we chose to be a third country, but it's their fault for implementing our choice. It's delusional, ideological nonsense, and it's just going to come back to bite us. I
think the expectation is that we have the single market without being in the single market. I mean, everything that they want and expect as a default is what the single market has built over the last 3 and a bit decades. And now that they've gotten used to it, they don't like being outside of it and think that this is actually the encumbrances they're feeling as what has been put up against them. Whereas rather it's the thing that the EU has solved. And so they're going back to outside what all the solutions were. And the interesting thing is, the pain that is being felt at the moment is just for exports. We haven't even really seen anything on the imports because we're still in a grace period, and the government is hoping to extend the grace period a 4th time because they don't want to do checks on goods coming in yet, because they know that they don't have their systems set up right. They know that's going to snarl up business and so forth and so on. And that could push up prices as well. So they're hoping to keep taking more stuff in from the EU without any checks as you would otherwise do for any other countries around the world under WTO understandings. They love WTO, but not yet, please. And so you say, well, why can't we stay in that kind of status forever? We know stuff coming from the EU is quality, so why don't we just have no checks whatsoever for the rest of time? Apart from the fact that this is giving a favourable status to the EU over all other countries, and that breaches some WTO understandings, it is also killing our own export business here, because anyone in the UK who now wants to export to anywhere in Europe has to go through all these barriers and checks, whereas anyone in Europe that wants to export to the rest of Europe, including the UK, can just send it there free, which is a massive, massive disadvantage to our exporters. And we're already seeing that hurt. So we put ourselves between a rock and a hard place here.
Yeah, like the response from, I just saw John Redwood of Brexit here this morning was, well, let's just produce everything ourselves. Obviously, no understanding of how things yeah, okay, let's really?
Like these free marketeers, I always thought were good weather, fun time free marketeers who didn't properly understand it, because they've got very strong protectionist instincts if things don't go their way. So free marketeers, it's great for them when the going's good and you can export everywhere and you've got production and none of your, industries are squealing. Then it's great. Everyone else should bend over and take it for you because it's the free market. As soon as some pain comes your way, then suddenly it's, the barriers go up, the shutters come up, and we need to invest double hard in our own production with no fundamental philosophical grounding other than a sort of reactionary nationalism about everything. But philosophically, in terms of the way that the economic system around us should work, they got nada in terms of decent balance on that.
It's
Sorry.
Sorry, go on, Max.
No. I was just going to ask Van Mantox. You live in Brighton, that's right? Yes.
Yeah.
How did Brighton vote in the Brexit vote?
Oh, massively Remain. I think it was about 70%, which is to be expected. I mean, obviously, we have the only Green MP in the country with Caroline Lucas, where we have free constituency, where we're a red and green little part of the south in a sea of blue down here in Brighton. So yeah, it was massively Remain, and it's starting to dwindle out now, but we had a massive population of EU nationals in Brighton. We got a massive hospital here. We had so many EU nurses and lots of jobs. But one thing about my job is I deliver to all sorts of people in Brighton, so I kind of get to know the base of the community. And in the last couple of years, I have seen a distinct lack of EU nationals. Oh, and it was one part that I loved about Brighton. I loved about this city is you can go into a pub in Brighton, similar in London, of course, where, you can meet someone from Spain, you can meet someone from Italy, you can have a chat with someone from Portugal, and it's one of those things that is really sad that I'm starting to see drop out of Brighton. But one thing I wanted to ask you guys about Brexit, what do you think about public opinion at the moment? Because obviously we talk about the Brexiteers and the politicians. Of course, they have to keep this lie up. But I am starting to see a change in public opinion. I mean, when Brexit first started going into effect, all your Brexit supporters were 100% it's going to make everything better. But then obviously, as we know, quickly we found out, well, fishing is now rubbish, farming's terrible. These trade deals we were supposed to get with the US haven't happened, and the ones that we did get are rubbish. And they then clung on to, well, COVID is having the massive effect on business. And now COVID is starting to disappear. People are realizing, actually, you know what, I think this is Brexit. Because the Brexit support base, I always sort of saw in sort of two camps, really. You had your anti-immigration, GB News types. But on the other hand, I think you just had a lot of people that were just suckered in by the lies. There were average people that just, didn't know about trade and didn't know about the EU, the ins and outs. And basically during the referendum, they had a situation where, that show, Would I Lie to You? It kind of seems like that. You had two people on stage and you had to guess which one's lying to you. You had Nick Clegg on one side that was going into some technical economic stuff that a lot of people didn't understand, and you had Nigel Farage on the other that made it nice and simple. 350 million we're going to save, we're going to make our own laws. And I think a lot of people just got suckered in. They're decent people. I mean, members of my family got suckered into these lies, but they're decent people. And I think these people are now starting to wake up and they're starting to realize the lies, and they're angry. And I think even just over the past year, you think of the difference in the Brexit support. I think it's down. I think it's definitely down.
I think when you said there about
your own family.
No.
I was going to ask about.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, go, Mike.
Because you were saying even your own family. So are you seeing that within your own family? And
Yeah, definitely. I was talking to my dad the other week, actually. He massively regrets it. He voted for Brexit. It was kind of a weird situation before the referendum because I felt like I wanted to try and persuade him not to vote for Brexit. But every time we talked about it, we were on the verge of a real massive argument, really, really falling out. Him, my stepmom was so pro-Brexit, and I wanted to try and change their mind. But every time I went to see him, I'm like, we're going to fall out. We're going to fall out big time. And now I know he really regrets it. And you know, my dad, he's not a bigot. He's not a racist. He just got swindled by these lies. And the main thing for him was he got suckered into that the EU make all our laws. You know, that one is a massive thing. There is a massive argument. There is a massive part of the Brexit vote that is the control of the EU. You've got the racist side, but I don't think that's as big as this thing that the EU control our country when they don't. And that was the biggest thing for people.
Yeah, I think the idea, there's a number of very interesting things you said there. I was smiling because I was thinking of, you know, when you were saying about, you know, you had the Remainer on one side telling you something and you had Nigel Farage on the other. And it reminded me of something that James O'Brien often uses. The selling tickets to the ghost train or selling tickets for the speak your weight machine. You know, one is more popular than the other, and one is based on falsehoods, while the other is telling you the facts. And yeah, people prefer, you know, the paper mache ghosts or whatever. But yeah, it's this idea that people also you hit on this idea of that the EU is making the rules for us, and I think the Brexiteers like Farage and others were very clever in how they sold it as the EU is something external. The EU is something that we're not part of. It's like, yes, we have to leave this thing that we're not part of. In a sense, that's the way they sold it, as something external. So it's imposing rules on us, not that we're partaking in it. And if you look at, you know, the European Convention on Human Rights, who wrote that? It was the British. You know, it's not that it's something external that we need to leave. And then just one other point, and then maybe bring in Alex as well. Something about Jacob Rees-Mogg I always found interesting was how he always sold, you know, leaving the single market. Well, we can also, you know, we can have the benefits of being outside the single market. We can have the benefits of the single market, but being outside it at the same time. And a question I'd love to ask Jacob Rees-Mogg is, are you a member of any club? I'm pretty sure he's a member of many clubs or organizations. And I say, well, can you be outside it and still have, you know, and not pay membership fees, but still have the benefits of being a member? Because if that's the case, I'd love to be part of that club as well. So it's nonsensical, but I think it feeds into a sort of exceptionalism that, well, we don't have to be a part of the single market, but we can still have the benefits because, you know, we're important. Alex,
and these are the exact lies that are now being exposed now, and people are starting to realise. They were told that we'd still be able to trade exactly the same as before, you know, and people are starting to realise it. That's why I wanted to know what you guys think on the public opinion, whether you think it is.
I just want to say one more thing, and then bring in the other two guys. The idea that it started off as if Brexit would be wonderful, then it'd be, well, it won't be so bad. Then it was, we've had worse. Then we lived through the Blitz. Then it's then I saw recently somebody saying, yeah, well, you know, it was in relation to the cost of living crisis. It's not exactly the same, but the mentality was the same. About, well, yeah, well, people used to live in houses without central heating. Why are people complaining? And it's the same sort of mentality of, things should be getting better. You know, parents or grandparents used to believe that their children would have a better life. You know, Brexiteers were saying, once we leave, everything will be better. Now things are getting worse, and they're saying, yeah, we can live with that.
For 50 years.
Yes.
We lived with that for 50 years. 75 actually is what Mogg quoted as. Take us 75 years. It's like, right, so that's several lifetimes. Like, our grandchildren will be on the verge of death by the time like this has become a good thing. And that's then dependent on whether or not all these other like countries decide to stop being protectionist. It's one of Mogg's like big go-tos was, oh, the protectionist racket. It's like, well, yeah, there are problems with being a protectionist racket. There are also advantages, and you're just focusing on the negative. And I think this actually tracks back a little bit earlier to what we were talking about, where we were saying about there's this juxtaposition with the the Brexiteers. One group wants this free market thing, but I actually get the feeling that locals want a protectionist thing. And I think there's a disparity between the Brexit elites, or people who claim they're elite, and the average person. You hear about people being like, we've lost our community, we've lost our work, we can't build stuff, we can't sell it abroad. So that means, well, in order to do that, you need to put up barriers in order to stop cheaper goods coming in. But then you've got Mod going, oh, we want cheap food and cheap trainers and cheap clothing. It turns out, I think the Brexit report that came out this year, clothing and footwear have gone up in price. I haven't heard anyone grab him on that. And it almost sold like we were all going to live on like Gumdrop Hill down Lollipop Lane with golden streets of gorgeousness, and everyone was going to be happy, and everyone was going to have jobs, and everyone was going to earn more. And then you ended up like that was what was pretty much sold, like this total fantasy. And then, of course, they had the irony was they jumped on Project Fear. We should, the Remainers should have been the ones calling them Project, fearing the EU, fearing immigration, fearing migrants.
That's a good point.
And yet, they coined it before the Remain side did. But I think going back to the original point that Van Man made, I think people are really pissed off. To quote Tyler Durden, I think they're very, very pissed off. And I think they're starting to realise that. And the way I've been watching it is on Question Time. Everything that was promised about Brexit, cheaper food, better goods, more space in schools, more space in hospitals, it's not happening. In fact, in Question Time, I remember a nurse coming out and saying, if you vote for this, you are going to have longer waiting times because they're going to leave. Like, EU migrants are going to leave. And she was booed and jeered and everything else out the studio. But it's becoming real. We don't have enough people to fill in vacancies. I'm hearing from restaurant owners that their managers or assistant managers are going to smoking spots where from other restaurants and trying to cajole people into their restaurants. They're that desperate for staff. And I mean, it's just a complete mess. I think people are very angry, and I think we'll see this, and we'll talk about it later with the May elections. I think that's going to be very interesting. I don't think what Boris is doing, turning up in the Ukraine and all that crap, is going to make any difference to his campaign. I think he's in more trouble than I think they realise. I think the public are going to be sending a very strong message in May. As long as certain parties can make themselves known as a better alternative. But there are problems within that as well. What do you think, Mike?
So, in terms of the fundamental question that Van Man asked, what are people thinking about Brexit now? There is polling showing that 45% think that it is damaging. 20-something percent, was it 3 or 8, somewhere in that region, think that it's a good thing, and then the rest don't know. So it's approaching a 2-to-1 ratio of those that think it's damaging versus those that think it's good. The only time when it got close was at the beginning of 2021, when we had the vaccine rollout start faster than the rest of Europe, and a lot of people hoodwinked into thinking that that was Brexit related. But then that fell away fairly quickly as Europe caught up and sort of like people got a more sensible appreciation of what was happening. I think there are very few... No, let me phrase it differently. In terms of what's making that difference, I think, as you guys have highlighted, it's the lack of good stuff from Brexit that jades it particularly badly. There is no deliverable from it that the public at large value. There's no extra money, there's no clear overhaul of the system. We're clearly not in a better system. People's lives have not changed for the better. So I think when I say people, you think of the average point. A lot of people think that Brexit yeah, we did it. We didn't really get anything from it. Yeah, it's got problems. Maybe that will resolve, but at the moment, it's a big fat meh. I don't think there are many people who are as angry about it as us four, maybe, or some of those watching. But I think a consensus is building that there was a lot of overblown promise in it that didn't deliver, it just delivered, cost and all the rest, but it hasn't actually made any tangible benefits to our life. It's just added for various businesses and for various sectors more red tape, more confusion, and so forth and so on. And I think, as to the point of the popularity of Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party, I think it links up with other aspects of their behaviour about the bullshittiness. Just bullshit, 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 but nothing actually happens. Lie, 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 make up stories, make up numbers, and people get more and more frustrated, not just with Brexit, but Brexit's a part of this style of management which is governance by pure makey-uppy bullshit. Not being truthful with data, not being collaborative with the opposition party, not being open to the public, but just constant fobbing off, like all the way through Partygate, fobbing off. And then how you manage the pandemic, and first country to leave the pandemic. Yeah, people are still dying at the same rate that they were yesterday, but it's a complete step change in terms of we're beyond it now. It's a thing in the past, and then deaths sort of slowly rising, but we can claim that we were the first out of it. So it's all about sales, it's all about claim, and I think the public at large is becoming very jaded with this management style of very patronizingly treating us all like idiots and thinking it's the sales line that will work and get them from day to day. And you see that mentality of Boris Johnson starting to infiltrate into the rest of his government, even down to kind of like Rishi Sunak and his wife and his own, green card. It's all very treat yourself well and then just bullshit the public and they'll forget about it. That seems to be the strategy, which I think is the main thing winding people up right now.
I just want to say thanks to Sean for that super chat, who says thanks for telling the truth about Brexit. And Claire Sweet has a super chat for us as well. Thanks so much, Claire Sweet. Morning, guys. If the UK wanted back into the EU, how would they do it? Is there an appetite cross-party to campaign for reunification? I just want to say something, just that's something that Mike hit on. There's more and more people realize that leaving the EU was a bad idea. And I think the polls are pointing that direction. But something paradoxically about all of this as well is that there isn't a huge amount of support for rejoining the EU. So a lot of people say, yes, there are problems, but I think there's this also, or maybe I'm wrong on that, and you guys can respond to that. But I think there isn't an equal amount of, okay, it's bad, so we should rejoin. That's a problem that we need to work on, I think. Because I think many people believe, okay, it's bad, but it will get better eventually. But they don't realize that being outside the single market and the customs union, things do not get better. They're going to be permanently bad. So businesses will adapt, businesses will hire new staff, but that's not getting better. Maybe the bad stories are going to be further and further under the radar, but that's not answering Claire's question. So how does the UK rejoin? Well, I think the first thing is the Tories need to be removed from power. You need a pro-European party in Westminster, probably the Labour Party in coalition or with some sort of support from other parties. Then you need to reform. I think proportional representation needs to be put in place. It needs to replace first past the post. And then there has to be work towards rejoining. It's not going to be something that will happen immediately. I think the first step would be maybe to rejoin the single market and the customs union, and then eventually to rejoin the EU. And then also on the other side, there has to be bridge building, because I think a lot of bridges have been burnt, frankly, over the last number of years by Brexiteers and Boris Johnson and others. It's not just about. I think Phil from A Different Bias was mentioning this also the other day, where it's not just the political parties, it's also the people. So, and that's difficult. That's probably more difficult, convincing the people that it's a good idea to rejoin, because the political parties, the Labour Party are pro-Europe in general, I think. Maybe somebody might disagree with me on that. But we have the Lib Dems, we have the Greens, the SNP, but that's a different kettle of fish. They are all, they all want to rejoin the EU in a sense. But it's the public you need to convince. And there's a lot of work to be done there, because you have the right-wing media. As soon as, if Keir Starmer were to say, let's rejoin the EU, you can imagine the next day he'd be called a traitor, he'd be called all names under the sun by the likes of the Daily Mail, the Express and others. So I think while the parties may want to rejoin, there's a lot of work to be done to convince the public as well. Because if you don't have the public along, all you need is another Farage figure in the following election to say, no, let's leave. So what's your take on that, guys? Maybe Mike, do you want to go first?
Well, I think the proof the proof is in the pudding for public opinion. I mean, we just need all these things to be exposed, the lies to be exposed, which they are being. The fact that there is no longer an economic argument for Brexit, it's not there. Now COVID is starting to come out of the picture a bit more. People are seeing it and people are being bored. I totally agree that a lot of Brexit voters that are now starting to regret their vote still would not want to lose face and go grovelling back to the EU. I think they could be on board with a Swiss, Norway style system where we rejoin the single market and customs union, but actually fully going in. There's a lot of work to be done there, but it will come. It will come through time. Like I say, I think public opinion just in the last year is massively different. If we're going forward to when our next election is in 2-3 years' time, wherever it's going to be, I see public opinion massively swaying as all the lies start unraveling and people get exposed to it.
Mike?
I agree with that. Mike, yeah?
Yes, so it's a bit more complex because there's the public sentiment, which is your essential position. There's the willpower of the public sentiment behind it, and then there's the mechanisms and hurdles that we need to get through, from the political parties through to what those political parties need to do in order to rejoin. So as you were talking, I just quickly looked up where the latest polling is at. In hindsight, do you think Britain was right or wrong to vote to leave the EU? And this is from whaUKthinks.org. And the latest poll from 23rd of March 2020, right to leave 38%, wrong to leave 49%, don't know 13%. And that's a very consistent trend, that more people think that it was wrong to leave than was right to leave. If there was another referendum on Britain's membership of the EU, how would you vote? Most recent one by Delta Poll, 4th February 2022, Remain 48%, Leave 40%. And then if you go to rejoining, and Wikipedia has actually got a nice little graph up here, the most recent one from January, and YouGov had rejoin on 42% and not join on 39%. So, and that's more even in terms of it flicks back and forth, but predominantly over the last few months, it has been pro-rejoin rather than not join. So that is actually, would you actively want to join the EU from where we are now? That's a much tougher question, and most people will say yes. But you can't put up your feet on the table with that and rest easy, because there's some massive hurdles to get through. Firstly, you would need a larger public sentiment for rejoin, and it can't just be anger at Brexit and say, yeah, I would rejoin. There have to be positive reasons in order to do it. Then you need political parties to actually be championing it, and Labour will not touch it at the moment for the reasons that we all know, and I'm glad that they're not actually, because I don't want Keir Starmer trying to sell rejoin and trying to make it a Labour as this and Tories as this thing, because as you'll see in what I'm going to say in a sec, that would actually be hugely destructive. So Keir Starmer is doing us a massive favour at the moment by staying the F away from this topic, because it needs to be a non-party aligned thing, right? And it needs to be pressure that we can put on all parties, because we need representation of that in all parties. Reason being, joining the EU is a two-way deal. It's not that we can just say to the rest of Europe, oh, we've decided we want to join now. They would say, F off big time. You've wasted our time for years. And while you have one political party that is adamantly against EU membership and other political parties that are for it, we don't want to be doing deals with you, because you'll just play hokey cokey with us down the decades. You know, you've got your left foot in and your right foot out, and then you're in and out, and you're messing us all about, like, off. So, the real way that we get rejoin, from our political standpoint, the real way that we get ready, is either within the Conservative Party, they have a flip around as to where we are, or we get to a political situation like with PR, for example, whereby it's nigh on impossible for the Conservative government to form a government just by itself without having any collaborations with any other party. In which case, it is very, very unlikely that a Conservative Party would be able to come to power with a huge majority and take us back out, because we'd have a political system that is more like the collaborative politics of the continent rather than the combative winner-takes-all politics of the UK and the US. So those are the hurdles we need to get through. We need more public sentiment that's for. We need a political system whereby if we were to go back in, that would look like a stable option. And then you can take different bites as you see, you know, customs union, single market, Erasmus, free movement. You can all reasonably have chomps at that if you've got a clear, overwhelming and likely to be stable political and public majority for those moves.
Alex, what do you think about that?
Oh, definitely agree. It's almost like you've got to do it as salami tactics, as they say, or I've heard say in the military. It's got to be slice by slice. And in many ways, I felt this had to happen because you had to show people that it wouldn't work, and they had to see that for their own eyes. Because if we had like a second vote and just cancelled the whole thing, there would always be this large number of people that would be hacked off and going, "We didn't even give it a chance." I think even Nigel Farage said on record, "Give it 2 years." He said, "Give it 2 years and see what it's like. And if it's rubbish, then we can start talking about going back in." But of course, as we all know, we've burnt quite a few bridges, and we need Boris out because he's been calling Europeans Nazis, along with a plethora of other insults. I mean, it's just been combative all the way through, and unfortunately, I can definitely agree with the hokey pokey of one in, one out we've got in this country, because it's a relatively even split, even with 3% now saying they're willing to rejoin. It needs to change. We need to educate people a bit more about how the EU works. I mean, the system of government, I'd probably compare it more to a cooperative democracy than I would as a traditional democratic system. And there's good reason for that. If you started having presidential elections, that would essentially start a position where the EU is starting to put pressure, or has the person running for president of the EU could then have pressure on individual states and say, well, look, the Europeans have elected me, we should have more power. But because it's such a complex system, and some of the names of the councils are very similar, it creates a lot of confusion and makes it very easy for people to be able to destabilize what it actually is and how it operates. Essentially our prime minister gets to appoint 4 people in different positions. Going back to the main message of the question, how do we go back in? Just got to start saying, look, this isn't working. We'll be richer in. We stick to that message and we keep it really simple. We'll have a referendum on it because this is clearly not what was promised. You offered this massive buffet of choices. So, for some people, it was the Norway option. I mean, even Farage said that on about 7 occasions. Yeah, we'll go for Norway. That's what we want. even though he had no political power within Westminster. That's what he was saying. Then he flipped it and said, now it's WTO. You've also got people like Daniel Hannan, who was saying we could stay in the single market. You had other people saying, we'll still have freedom of movement. It was just it was too much of a buffet. And if you break down the voting statistics of what people actually wanted and narrow that down, the majority wanted Remain, and the others had different ideas of what they wanted for their form of Brexit. And it means that actually Brexit didn't have a coherent voice and plan to implement if we actually ejected ourselves from the EU. And that's, I work a little bit with the Rejoin EU party. And, there are definitely ways and means of pushing this forward. I think we're going to push for the London mayoral elections. I think that's a key one, because you've got a problem with the electoral system being first past the post. Because it's first past the post, it's a winner takes all. And you always hear this from people saying, oh, I'm not going to vote for this party because if I vote for Green, then the Conservatives will get in. But and I think there's a false narrative there, but getting even that through to people is a problem. Whereas something like the mayoral elections and putting in Rejoin EU people, or let's just say Rejoin EU people, not a party, but people who want to rejoin the EU in relatively powerful and prominent positions, that's where I think you'll have a bit of a change. But also doing what you've got in Brighton, you've got Caroline Lucas. She's quite a powerful force. I don't know if anyone here has met her, but she's pretty powerful. She's got a great voice. She knows what she's talking about. She's able to hold the government to account successfully, like either in Parliament or on committee. I think
I've met her.
You need to focus on one constituency and go, right, this constituency is a heavily rejoined one. Let's really put a bloody nose to the government and go, sort out Brexit and make it good if you claim you can. Otherwise, this is the start of a big change within politics. And that would be my personal plan.
I think Mike might want to come in on that. I think or did you want to say something in response to that, Mike?
There was one thing that I want to say, which is if we are going to argue for Rejoin, I don't think it's enough to say Brexit hasn't worked, we'll be richer in the EU. I mean, I think that will work for some people, but I think for me that there also needs to be the thing of, I want my country to be responsible again. I want it to be a collaborative country working with the other countries of the EU. I want us to be able to step up to the plate there. Of course, I want the extra rights for our citizens of being to live and work and settle down and retire everywhere. Of course, we want all the benefits, but we also want to be a mature country that can take on the responsibilities as well and help shape the standards and the outlook and the security and the co-investment of our whole continent. We don't want to be out on our own having a little strop. We actually want to be team players because we believe in our country enough that we think our country can be a responsible team player and team leader on our continent. And last time we were in the EU, we made a whole lot of kind of like fuss about how things were run. But really, what we should be doing is actually seeing ourselves in a leadership position in there. And we just need to take time out, sort ourselves out, and then come back and be better partners.
I would say we've got two things as well to back that up as well, because we've got the issue with Russia, we've got essentially a new Cold War and a new enemy, and we've got climate change. Those two things are only going to resolve themselves working as a team. And I totally agree with that. I think you can definitely go on a multi-format message on this, not just that of being a richer and wealthier country.
Can I just...
Exactly. You've got to have matters of principle in there as well, and you've got to have matters of vision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just bring in we have a super chat from Patrick. Thanks so much, Patrick. He asks, do you think Brexiteers believed their lies, used it as a tool to grab power, or was it a deliberate plan to leave the EU to avoid new offshore tax laws? I think the tax issue is a bit more complicated than just a simple case of the Brexiteers wanted to leave the EU to avoid paying tax. I think it's a bit more complicated than that. But I think it's important to differentiate between Brexit voters and Brexiteers, because the Brexiteers are the ones who, after Brexit, look at the disaster and say, no, it's good. while many people have shifted, many people, and maybe Van Man, I think you were saying earlier, your parents or someone, relatives of yours who you had arguments with them. I don't know if they have changed their opinion since then, but many people have, they voted for Brexit, they thought it was a good idea, and now they've realized, no, it was a mistake. Maybe you can correct me on that, Van Man. Was it what you had said about maybe your parents who had voted?
Yeah, it was my father and my stepmother. I said to you earlier that our relationship was very tense during that Brexit period, because I wanted to try and convince them otherwise. But if we talked about Brexit, if the topic come up, we would just have blazing arguments, and it was just not a nice place to be. I'm not sure about my stepmom, but my dad has definitely changed his opinion on Brexit, and he feels incredibly guilty about it as well. I said his main thing was this supposed EU control over his life. That was the main thing. He wasn't coming from an immigrant argument or anything like that. It was just this obsession that he had because of the newspapers that he read. And
so, what's changed his mind now?
He's seeing the lies. He's seeing everything being exposed. He's realised that you have to give and take. That's the main thing that has come clear to him now. Is that yes, we have to take.
Does he want to go back in? Does he want to rejoin, or is he just pissed off that he was sold a pup?
Yeah, see, that is the key thing that you're saying there, Mike. That is the difference, and that is what a lot of people think. He wouldn't want to lose face and rejoin. But he would be open to more being closer ties, single market, customs, all these sort of things. But the full going back to the EU, can we come back, please? Yeah, he wouldn't like
with
that.
Begging bowl and all that. Yeah.
So, but what you said, Mike, earlier about Keir Starmer was really interesting. I agree with you. I don't think he should be going full blazing. We should go back into the EU. It's not the right tactic, and it does have to be a very, very slow process. And I think you'd all agree that the very first step and the most important one, and the one that we have to wait a little while for, is getting rid of the Tories. And I guess that brings us to the local elections, where we can send a clear message on that. But I think that is the only clear first step, and in that time, just trying to change public opinion, really. But that has to be it. We have to get rid of them. That has to be the first step.
Yeah. Just before we move on to the topic of the local elections, I just want to read out two more super chats. This is from Stanley. Thanks so much, Stanley. Will we even have a democracy in 2 years? The BBC neutered, Channel 4 sold off, voter ID cutting out many voters, electoral commission ineffective. And then we also have one from number 3 who says the entire system needs to change. That's the only realistic way that the country can progress. Thanks to Stanley and number 3 there. I think we could sort of cover these things in the local elections. Do you think so? We could start off with what we could start off maybe with some predictions for the elections in May. Are the Tories going to get a bloody nose, or are they going to maintain their control over what's happening? Maybe Alex, do you want to go first?
It's a tough one. It is, because local elections, you always have lower turnout, which means that things can change and flip-flop more easily. I think I don't think those are the right pieces of terminology there to use, but I think they're harder to predict, I think would be a better way of describing it. But the amount of stuff that has gone on that has just angered everyone, I would be shocked if it's not a bloody nose to Conservatives. But I think there'll also be some staunch Tory supporters. I mean, literally, I think to the point where Boris could do a Trump and go out into the street and shoot someone in the head type of thing and still have people voting for him, saying it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. So I think he's got that core voting group, despite the numerous scandals. It's like Teflon with the Prime Minister. And historically, I've never seen anything quite like it. This level of corruption and incompetence, historically, I don't know of an equivalent.
It gets worse and worse and worse, and his polling dips a little bit, and then it returns to normal. Like, during the pandemic, let the bodies pile high. Many people thought that was going to be the end of Johnson, and then within a week, he were talking about something else. He was actually criticizing Keir Starmer for wanting another lockdown. Then Brexit came, like the checks came in for Brexit. The queues at the ports harmed him a little bit, but then things went back to normal again. It's then Partygate. Yeah, that's the end of Johnson. That's the end of Johnson. The media were like, yeah, he's a dead man walking, and then he's back to normal again. Maybe Van Man, do you have any predictions for the May elections?
Yeah, local elections are funny, really, aren't they? Because obviously we're all voting for our local council, but really it's more, I see it as a gauge of what the current government are doing. Are you supporting what the current government are doing? If you are, vote Conservative. I think, seriously, I'm all for having conversations with people with different politics. Whether you agree with high tax, low tax, or state-run industry, stuff like that. I'm all for different opinions on politics. But this current Conservative Party it's not about that. They're evil. I mean, they are evil, and people need to send a message. And I seriously think that anyone that is voting Conservative in these local elections have to seriously look at their moral compass. A couple of days ago, I do some deliveries for my local food bank. I pick up use by date food for them. And this local one started at the beginning of the pandemic. They were doing sort of 50 to 100 meals. I spoke to them a couple of days ago, and they've had their biggest day ever, and they've done 700 meals. 700 people in the city of Brighton are unable to feed themselves. It's insanity. It's complete insanity in a country that's supposed to be 20th richest in the world.
And then you have people like Dominic. And then you have people like Dominic Raab who'll go there and get a selfie in front of the food bank.
Exactly. So I just think it's not about whether you have conservative values or you're right leaning with your politics. We can talk about that. We can have a discussion about that. But this UK Conservative Party are a different breed. They're just evil. And like I say, anyone that's thinking of voting for them in this local election has got to seriously look at their moral compass, I think. Sorry, rant over. But yeah, I think they have to. They have to take a bloody nose. They have to. They have to.
Mike?
I think there's going to be the usual thing of expectation setting. If you set a bar at a level whereby you can pass it. So I think the line that the Conservative Party will want to come out with was, you thought we were going to get a bloody nose, but it wasn't a bloody nose. And compared to other mid-term elections, if you will, down the ages, then look, oftentimes it's a disaster, but it wasn't a disaster for us. Why is that? Why are we so resilient? And this is 12 years in as well. So I think there's going to be, from the Conservative Party, a lot of management around people's expectations, thinking that they're absolutely, given previous trends, due a complete and utter bloody nose. But if they don't come out with the bloody nose, as defined by themselves, then that goes to show that there's something inherently good and wonderful about them, that they are this robust. Whereas Labour's got a different challenge. Labour's got to try and get that bloody nose and have it, seen as being a bloody nose. And in order to get that, it needs turnout. The problem with Labour is that people might not turn up for the Tories, but who's going to turn up for Labour? Does Labour have enough vision? Do they have enough charisma in that wooden plank known as Keir Starmer in order to set all of these different parts of the country ablaze and come out in vast numbers, keenly waving to go and vote for Labour? So maybe that was a bit mean about Keir Starmer, but sometimes I felt very frustrated that even though he's done a great job at detoxifying his party to those people who were terrified of Corbyn, and has made the party more acceptable to those people that the Labour Party needs to. Nevertheless, has he got on a front foot enough to make people think, I want to get out and vote for Labour today because I know what their vision is and I love it? I mean, how many of us know what Labour's vision to the country is?
Alex?
That's the big issue. Like, he could come up with 3 very simple policies that I think would be vote winners, and he could make them really vague until they get the manifesto out. But he could have come up with that, and he hasn't repeatedly. And you're almost like, well, you know, we've got continual number of elections coming. Why not come out and say, we're the Labour Party, we're going to focus on the NHS, we're going to focus on housing, we're going to focus on minimum wage. And, you know, he doesn't have to go into detail about what it is. He can say, look, not until the manifesto, but this is going to be some of our key priorities.
Yeah, a demonstration of intent, but also a demonstration of just energy. You know, Boris Johnson has got a lot of distance because he doesn't waste energy on reading his briefs or thinking about the truth, but just putting it out as a front man on stage as a big show. He's got that energy level to say, yes, that's a great idea. Yes, that's a great idea. Morning, folks. Everything's amazing. Look, here's me in my new fancy dress. But it's energy, energy, energy. And if you're going to run a country, you need to demonstrate that level of health. So Keir Starmer is good on the trust, good on fundamental principles. We all know he's smart. He keeps his hair tidy and here's a QC. Great. But you actually have to show that you've got a lot burning in the tank as well for people to think, oh, if we get on his train or her train, it's going to go some distance. It's got excitement to it. So that's what
he
we
needs
need
to be more David Miliband in a sense.
What?
I've met him. I didn't like him. Anyway.
Who's the last charismatic prime minister we've had? And charisma is one of the key cornerstones of, it is a key indicator to becoming president of the United States. Can anyone name a charismatic politician that was prime minister? Because I struggle, like proper full-on Obama or JFK type of charisma.
John Major? No. No, Blair. Blair was the only
so,
one.
I mean, let's take, for example, Gordon Brown, not as a charismatic, but because he didn't have that, even though he was a bright guy and a good man, and people are seeing now more that he's a good man who cares about communities, and that's his focus, he couldn't handle it in the job because he didn't have that firepower, even though he had all the qualifications and background and was a smart guy and principles in the right place. You need it. You need that flair and fire and carry through.
That's a good point. I mean, he's probably, you guys might disagree, but he's probably the best prime minister we've had in my lifetime. I mean, but he just had no charisma, did he? And it is important. You know, honestly, I don't really care about cricket. I want the best person for the job, but you need to appeal to everyone. You need to have that charisma, don't you? And you're right about the vision with Labour. They need to show a bit more, but they also need to shake off this absolute garbage of these trans issues that people hate them for so much. It's all nonsense. But if you ask someone about Labour, will you vote for Labour? Oh no, they care about trans issues too much. Or
Well, that's the thing. They've been trying to dodge this topic as much as they've been trying to dodge Brexit, but it gets thrown on them because the right concocting this woke narrative that there is a woke mob out there, and somehow that woke mob is driving Labour, whereas the current leadership of Labour want nothing to do with that stuff that was being associated with other parts of the left. They just want to convince the public that they are going to be better and more responsible managers of the economy. So it is something that the Labour leadership are looking to avoid. But of course, the question, can a woman have a penis, gets thrown at Keir Starmer. It doesn't get thrown at Boris Johnson, even though Boris Johnson has never answered that question. So is the stick with which Labour is going to be beaten with, all of this simplistic, give us your answers on this issue, and horrify either one side of the, discussion or the other side of the discussion. And so, it's interesting given that, the Conservatives got burnt a little bit about that recently. But what Labour want to do and what they're doing right is saying that the engine of their politics is not about cultural warfare, because that happens in the culture at large. It's just that they would manage things better than the Tories manage things, because the Tories aren't managing things very well, are they? And they need to carve out that space that running the country is about competent management, and there will always be cultural commentary going on around, and sometimes it will be, this side will be left leaning and this side will be right leaning, but the function of government, the function of a cabinet team, and the function of a parliament is to manage the country well in terms of its economics, in terms of its structure, and then when it comes to cultural issues, make sure all sides of cultural issues feed into a debate that comes to conclusions that both sides can get on board with. So it is fundamentally about who has a vision that is about better management of this country in terms of its fundamental structure, and is respectful to all parts of cultural debate, which will go on as we go forward.
Can I just read out two super chats we have from Cahill and Nico? Thanks so much for both of you. Nico says, okay team, when do the riots start? And Cahill says, thanks for all the videos. Is there a fear of having local funding cut if you don't vote Tory, for not voting Tory? I think this could be something on people's minds. And we saw it, for example, in where was that? I don't remember. There was a by-election last year where they had a Labour MP, and then they voted for the Tories because they thought the Labour MP was not doing. What was that? I don't remember.
It was on leaflets. It was the promises of, you got a better shot at funding if you've got me as representative because I can talk to government.
Yeah.
It is actually. I mean, I did see somewhere that Labour-run councils get less funding. But is that true? Or maybe you guys will fill me in.
There is pork barrel politics coming in, and certainly with the Towns Fund, it got rigged to prefer Tory areas, including Rishi Sunak's, for example. I think the thing is, their opportunity to do proper pork barrel politics, they've blown it, because they haven't actually poured into Tory areas sufficient amount of funding to level them up properly. If they'd done that, then other people go, ooh, we'd like a bit of that. But at the moment, because this government, by an increasing number of people, is seen as complete liars, if they say, vote for us and you'll get more funding, a lot of people will say, bullshit, you're just lying again.
And also, I think there's a problem with the leveling up, is that where you level up one place, you level down another. And that's, I think, has helped the Liberal Democrats in the South in particular, where the traditional Tory voting areas would see, hey, wait a minute, why are you sending money up north? We want the money. And it's pissed off a lot of voters in Tory constituencies. I just want to read out. No, we have another super chat, and then we'll have to finish for today. How will Labour perform in the local elections? Maybe we can just get a quick prediction. Maybe Alex, do you want to go first? Which do you think it'll be? Keir Starmer it would be a huge victory for Starmer and Labour, or?
I think the Tories. Best thing I can say is I think the Tories will get a bloody nose out of it. I'm leaning in that way. I wouldn't give it 100% backing, and I think the Lib Dems are going to come into the south. I think the Green Party are going to grow quite a bit because they've already shown a pattern of growth, which was one of the big things that came out of the last set of elections that we had, local elections. Like the Green Party really grew. They were the biggest winners actually, which was ignored. So yeah, it's going to be. I say Labour will probably grow, Greens will grow, Libs will grow, and Conservatives will shrink. That's my prediction.
Van Man?
Yeah, I'd say the same. I mean, it's just a matter of how big a bloody nose. Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, they'll all grow. And I think with council elections, you've also got the thing where people that are more into their local council and politics in general vote, don't they? And they'll want to send a message. But yeah, it's just going to be a matter of how big a bloody nose the Conservatives get, I think, in this one.
Mike?
I'd say ask me in a week. because the date of the vote is the 5th of May. So if in a week's time, so this is the 17th, you've got about 2 weeks left in order to really come out with a big program and a big vision. I think if in a week's time or just over, Labour have come out with kind of like, this is what we're about, this is our drive, this is our fire, here we go, then I would say their prospects look very good, especially if it's a nice sunny day or when it's time for voting. If in a week's time or just over, they're still sort of like muddling along and have got no big program to put on the table, then I would have thought, it'll be in that zone where Conservatives do a little worse, and they will claim that the polling was dire, but they're doing better because there's some other issues around that. Like, for example, there's elections in London, and the slip for the Tories in London hasn't been that much because we're talking about a floor effect. It's already pretty low. So I think that if Labour come out with a big programme, they could do really well. If they don't, then we're going to see some Tory damage here and there, but it'll be enough that they can claim it's nothing like the bloody nose that everyone said that we were going to get. Ha.
No, yeah, I tend to agree. I think Labour really need to do a lot of legwork here. They need to put in a lot of effort, and they need to fire people up to come out and vote. Otherwise,
turn out for a purpose.
Yeah. You need to provide people with something. We have one more super chat, maybe not super relevant. This is from Ministerian, who says, but ultimately, why are local issues discussed in Westminster? More devolution would be welcome. Yeah, so I don't know if people notice this. Sometimes you see it normally at the beginning of Prime Minister's questions. An MP will stand up and say, I want to thank the Prime Minister for coming out to my constituency, or I want to welcome, was it about International Cake Day or National Cake Day or something like that. So why is, I have my own opinion. I think it's because MPs like to appear like they're doing something in their local community. What's your you probably agree with that.
I'd agree completely with that. Yeah, it's just a show, isn't
look
it?
Look at me I'm in Westminster, and I'm talking about the corner shop who does a great job in the community. It's not relevant to Westminster, it's just to look good.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's just it's a bit of time wasting for PMQs as well to narrow down the clock so Boris doesn't have as many questions to answer.
Mike?
The only one that should be talking about it is that MP for Dover, that Conservative one. Oh my God, what's her name?
Natalie.
The one that said the Dover queues are not down to Brexit. Yeah, she can talk about local issues, that's fine.
I think it's for all the reasons given above. One, that you show that you're down to earth, you care about local interests. That's a show in the House, but it's also a show to those back home, because you can tell them, I brought this up for you. But also, it is to sometimes help take down the temperature, when you're being grilled about Partygate, and then you can, put up a question about fridge deliveries, then it just helps. It helps to like bounce things around and say, oh yeah, another random issue here. So yes, give your leader a breather. All of that.
A complete coincidence that you talk about Boris Johnson and fridges in the same sentence. So guys, we've come to the end of the brunch today. I want to say a huge thank you to Mike and to Van Man Talks for joining myself and Political X today. It'd be great to have you guys get back again sometime if you're up for it.
Definitely. It was really good fun.
Definitely.
So guys, thanks to everyone who sent in their super chats. Greatly appreciate them. We'll see about sorting those out. We also want to say thanks to the moderators for doing a great job. Guys, also make sure to check out both Mike and Van Man Talks on social media and on YouTube. We'll be posting. I'll post the links on the description of this video. We should be. And hopefully. And we'll see you next week for some new guests. Take care. Thanks a lot. Do you want to say anything before we go, guys?
Thanks very much. Bye.
No, great chat. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, really good.
Right.
Fantastic.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that was